So 2017 was really a weird year for music. There was a lot of really great albums coming out, especially from debut artists, but there was also a lot of really bad music. And it was also the year we found out that all our favourite musicians were paedophiles, rapists, and all around awful people. It was a really wild year. It was incredibly hard for me to pick albums for this year's list because there were so many really great records, but in the end I think I finally managed to make the perfect list. I had to extend the list from just 10 albums to 20 because the list of honourable mentions just got so big, so we've really got quite a lot to get through in this video. So without further ado, here are my top 20 favourite albums of 2017. Covey's self-titled album. Covey are one of the many bands/artists on here with a debut album. In fact, the next 5 albums in a row are debuts. And that's just because there were so many great upcoming rock bands releasing fantastic debuts this year, and this album of course is one of them. I discovered the Scottish band over a year ago following their incredible single Animal, a song that is an explosive slice of energetic and anthemic pop rock. And from this song I was instantly hooked, meaning that the debut album was one that I was very excited for, and luckily it didn't disappoint at all. The album is a passionate and intense record full of so much vigour. From the opening moments of the opener La-Di-Da, the album just grabs you and goes full throttle until the very end. It's full of fantastic, memorable riffs, stunning vocal performances, and production that's bright and fizzy yet raw. The album brings back many of the band's most memorable singles and EP tracks and brings them new life in these new recordings that sound way more confident and in your face than they previously did. It's exactly how I think recycling old material should be done on your debut album. Vocalist Janine Shilstone dominates these tracks with incredibly powerful vocal lines and relentlessly upfront lyrics. If you're into pop rock or pop punk, then this is an album that is one definitely worth checking out. It's one that kind of fell under the radar, but undeservingly so. The Amazons' self-titled album. Over the last couple years, anthemic indie rock bands have been everywhere. They're unescapable in the UK rock scene, and a lot of the bands in the scene have started to break out and have huge crossover success. And one band that hasn't quite reached that level yet, but who deserve to and probably will in the near future, are the Amazons. A band with so much power and with an infectious attitude. Their debut self-titled album is the perfect introduction to who the band are and what they stand for. The album is fiery from start to finish with its memorable riffs and incredible sing-along hooks. Tracks like Stay With Me and Junk Food Forever are huge festival sing-along songs destined to be screamed back by thousands of fans. The album was recorded live, which gives the thing the feel of a really exciting and sweaty gig. Songs like In My Mind and Black Magic have these dark blues rock-esque riffs that sound like they could be lifted from a Royal Blood song or something. Although the stadium rock style to these songs may seem a little bit formulaic at times, it's a case where I think the formula works so well, so what's the point in trying to reinvent it? It's not the most amazing album in the world by any means, but if you're a fan of bands like Catfish and the Bottom End, then this is one that I highly recommend. Fan Club's self-titled album. There was really a lot of self-titled debuts this year. Fan Club's debut album is another one that I was really looking forward to. Although I'd only heard a couple of songs from the band previously, the huge hype surrounding them in the UK rock scene really intrigued me, and the album was one that hit me hard instantly with its chugging guitars, pounding bass lines, and catchy chanting choruses. The album is one of the better grunge revival albums of the last couple of years due to the band's knack of writing no-nonsense songs that are fast, short, and to the point. The band never got caught up in their egos and never tried to create these really long artsy songs or anything. They just want to make these in-your-face hard rock songs, and it ends up working really well in their favour. Riffs are simple yet effective, which works with the style of the songs. The album feels like a love letter to grunge music at times, and there are songs that are clearly inspired by the different sides of the genre. Tracks like Bullethead are clearly Nirvana inspired, and there's even the song Common Ground, which is a more late 90s Foo Fighters sounding song. But luckily the album never feels tired or recycled. Although the album isn't unique at all, the trio's strong songwriting keeps the album from losing its steam. It's an album that's an exciting and euphoric experience front to back. Feel Your Feelings Fall by The Regrets. So I got into this album quite late. I first heard it back in September because the band, along with fan club funny enough, were supporting the swimmers show that I was going to see, and I really dug the album straight away. It was exactly the kind of snarky, sarcastic punk album that I was looking for. Mixing 90s riot girl with 60s doo-wop, The Regrets have a sound that is unique yet familiar. The album is a brash, socially aware punk album which is covered in a youthful style that I've not seen done this well from any other band this year. The band members are all in their mid to late teens, with the lead singer Lydia being only 16 when recording the album, and that definitely shows on every single track. The band write a lot about the issues that modern day youth deal with every day. Songs like A Living Human Girl, which tackles the pressures of females having to be perfect, and there's the track Picture Perfect, which is about a girl who society views as being beautiful and everyone wanting to be with her. The album is full of a lot of punch and energy. It's a rebellious and honest album with huge group vocal choruses. Their lyrics are straightforward but really effective, and they work in the context of the songs. Lydia's vocals are fantastic. They're raspy and low, which is exactly what the style needs. She sounds incredibly mature, confident, and in your face. The rockabilly sound mixed with garage punk vibes makes the album incredibly exciting and a cut above a lot of the lo-fi sounding punk records coming out at the moment. This is another one that if you didn't check out before, I highly recommend. Beyond Repair by Blood Youth. Blood Youth are a melodic hardcore band from Harrogate, England. Beyond Repair is the band's debut album, and although it's not unique, it's a blast of vigour and ferocity that doesn't let up until its last moment. The band blends elements of hardcore punk with metalcore and also some post-hardcore melodies. There are many moments on the album that remind me a lot of early hardcore bands. There are a lot of power chord based riffs in the tracks and fast thrashing drum lines. This is blended in seamlessly with frontman Kaya Tersus's brutal screaming. The choruses are full of melody also, in which Kaya shows off his versatility as a vocalist. Some vocalists do not make the transition between screaming and clean vocals well. I mean, just look at the new Suicide Silence album. But Kaya does it perfectly with his in-your-face screaming and catchy yet belligerent melodic singing. Tracks like the singles I Remember and Reason to Stay are incredibly catchy, and you'll find yourself singing along the more you listen to them. Metalcore elements are brought into the songs also, with the severe breakdowns that are face melting. And luckily we don't get the cliche muted open note breakdown, which makes it really stand out and makes it more memorable than any of its equals. The production on this album is really good. It helps accentuate the high octane chaos of the songs on it. The use of guitar effects in the album also flesh the album out and create moments that just sound incredibly awesome. There are some fantastic riffs all throughout. Tracks like Pulling Teeth are particularly energetic and groovy. The guitar tones are brilliant also. They're surprisingly bright and crunchy for the genre. They leave all the bass sounds for the bassist, something that in a world of swept mids and loud low tones in the genre is a definite breath of fresh air, and something that is really thrilling to see. Although it loses a bit of its steam later on, it still is ferocious and fierce all throughout. It never gives up. It keeps its energy start to finish and doesn't do the corny slow track that you find on most albums in the genre. Everybody gives a fantastic performance with the brutal vocals, crushing guitars, coarse bass and volatile drums. It's a fantastic record from a band slowly working their way up there in the hardcore scene. Visions of a Life by Wolf Alice. So the two people who watched my record collection update may remember that I really didn't like this album, and since then I've listened to it a fair few times and now really quite dig it. Wolf Alice's debut album, My Love Is Cool, was my favourite album of 2015 and is still one of my favourite albums of the decade so far. I love that record so much and I'm constantly revisiting it. Visions of a Life is nowhere near as good as that album, but still holds its own quite well. The album goes in a much darker and at times more progressive rock style. It's a very bold and hypnotic album that is ominous and at times a real kick in the teeth. Tracks like Yuck Fu, Formidable Cool and the title track are incredibly loud and gritty tracks that thunder all throughout. The title track especially is a real highlight with its very wide feeling of dread and gloom all throughout. Ellie's vocals sound really good on a majority of the songs. She handles the softer moments gracefully but gives us some of the most exciting screams and aggressive shouting that she's done to date. The guitar tones are very booming and unique. This is blended with the glistening and raw synthesizers layered repeated all throughout the album. The production on this album is incredible. I honestly think this album has some of the best production work on any album this year. The album shows the band embracing a larger range of influences than just the grunge and folk sounds that they focused on before, and in many ways that works. There's a nice mix of noise rock, shoegaze, dream pop, psychedelia and hardcore punk on the album, but the only issue I have with this is that sometimes it gets a little bit too reminiscent of other bands, especially on the opening track Heavenwards, which is basically just a My Bloody Valentine song. Not to mention the album has some of the worst songs the band have ever done, including Don't Delete the Kisses and Sky Musings, two songs that I still absolutely hate. But luckily the rest of the album is incredibly exciting and intricate. Although not quite as good as their debut, the album seems like a huge sign of potential of things to come, and I'm incredibly excited to see where the band goes next. Fatherland by Kelly Okereke. Kelly really surprised me here. I didn't expect to like this album anywhere near as much as I did. For those who are unfamiliar with the name, Kelly Okereke is the lead singer of the British rock band Bloc Party. I've not talked about them much on this channel, but I'm a big fan of them, especially of their album Silent Alarm, which is one of the best albums in the post-punk revival scene of the 2000s. However, their newest album, Hymns from last year, was, how do I put it, absolutely awful. And not to mention, I'm not a huge fan of Kelly's other solo stuff, so I was skeptical. But I was also open-minded due to the fact that Kelly was stepping away from the electro house style of his previous two solo records in favour of a more acoustic folk sound, taking heavy influence from the Portland indie scene, especially from artists such as Elliott Smith. Kelly's knack for inviting the listener into the more personal areas of his life are on full force here. He sings about breakups, being taken advantage of, and also the feeling of growing up and having children. With this album, he strips away all the extravagance and excessiveness of his other solo work and presents us with a very stripped back sound. There's some beautiful finger-picked guitar work all over the album which perfectly complements Kelly's soft, soulful voice, and there are many songs on there with more luscious, almost Bright Eyes-esque instrumentation. My favourite song on the album has to be the song Versions of Us. It's a beautiful song about being in a relationship that's falling apart and longing for the spark that was once there to come back again, at least for just one more night. The first time I heard the song, it damn near brought me to tears, and even listening to it now still hits me straight in the gut. It's just such an incredible song. The album isn't incredibly original or unique. It's kind of a cliched singer-songwriter album, but the songs are so good that I can look past all of that. Kelly's songwriting on the album is top-notch. I think it's seriously some of the best songwriting he's ever done. If you're into that Elliott Smith, Nick Drake, Sufjan Stevens style of folk music and are looking for someone new in that style, I'd definitely recommend this album. It's not the most unique record I've ever heard, but it's one that I really like. Not enough people are checking out, so I say please check it out. Hopefully you won't regret it. After Laughter by Paramore. The new Paramore album is one that really grew on me over time. When I first reviewed it, I quite liked it, but said it was lacking a lot, and a lot of that opinion is unchanged. It is lacking a lot, and the songs that I didn't like at the time, I still don't like. But my admiration for the stuff I did like has only grown as I've revisited the album and let it sit with me. With the band's fifth album, they stripped away all of the pop-punk / emo-pop sounds that were left lingering after their last reinvention, and went for a more 80s new wave sound, and it definitely really works. The colourful and playful nature of the instrumentation contrasts the darker and more depressing lyrics perfectly, from the bubbly hard times to the slower moments of tracks like Forgiveness. Hayley Williams tackles darker subjects than ever before. She sings about her battles with depression and anxiety as well as the uncertainty of the future. The album was a huge uphill battle, and the band were constantly left wondering whether it would ever be finished and if they would carry on as a band, and that shows on every song. The album shows Paramore in a much more honest and mature way than we've ever seen them before, and this is blended in with these really fun and catchy songs with these huge sing-along choruses. Although tracks like Told You So, Fake Happy and No Friend are still really lacking in my opinion, the rest of the album is a really great listen. Although not as good as the band's first three albums, I definitely say it's a big step up from their previous self-titled album, and I'm actually quite a big fan of that album, so it's saying a lot. My rating was way too low in my review earlier in the year. This album is a real grower. The Incessant by Meatwave. We were really spoiled when it came to great punk albums this year, and the new Meatwave album is definitely one of them. Meatwave are a punk band from Chicago, and when I say punk, I mean pure punk. These guys are incredibly loud and blistering. Their new album, The Incessant, is one that is an incredibly draining yet cathartic album. One that isn't an easy listen, and at many times is kind of the music equivalent of a panic attack. The album is about the emotions that frontman Chris Sutter felt after going through a messy breakup. He felt himself consumed by anxiety and self-doubt, and describes it perfectly in these songs that are incredibly jarring and at times feel dissonant. Songs like the closing track, Killing the Incessant, goes into almost grindcore territories in how chaotic it is and how little melody there is, at least for the first half of the song. The album is a real visceral experience, one that is very hard to describe. It mixes these monstrous, reckless instrumentals and intimate emotional lyrics with these really memorable hooks. Songs like the title track and Run You Out are especially catchy. I remember Run You Out was the first song I heard by the band, and delving into the rest of the album was a really weird experience because it's completely different, but it's one that really stuck with me. The album is one of the most exciting and euphoric experiences I've had this year, but it's also heartbreaking and quite hard to listen to at times. If you like your punk music with a hell of a lot of grit and dissonance, then this album and band is worth checking out. Love in the Fourth Dimension by The Big Moon. The Big Moon are an all-female indie rock band from London. I discovered the band early last year and became quite a big fan, so I was incredibly excited for their debut. And the final album didn't disappoint at all. The tracks are gloriously messy and on occasion beautifully delicate and tender. Each member of the band gives a fantastic performance on their instruments with some really catchy guitar riffs, impressive drum fills and beguiling bass line. Lead vocalist Jules Jackson's vocals are notable in each track, with her switching back and forth from the soft and sensual Suck It and See style of Alex Turner to the aggressive shouting and screaming you'd expect from Ellie Rousel from Wolf Alice. There are some tracks on the album such as Sucker and Bonfire where she does these howling sounds which should be ridiculous and ruin the track, but they give it a weird quirk that makes the album more captivating. The album features the band's previous singles such as Cupid, Formidable, Silent Movie Susie, and the band's debut single and the album's opening track, Sucker. Each of these tracks fit really well together when hearing them in the context of the album. A large majority of the album is much slower than the main singles, but they never feel boring or like filler tracks like slow songs sometimes can feel. The band have a great knack of writing songs that can be as emotionally captivating as they are exciting. Admittedly, the album does follow a lot of the tropes that indie rock follows, with the grunge influences and the reverb-heavy lead guitars, but instead of making an album that sounds like every other album in the genre, The Big Moon managed to create something completely unique and distinctive. It never gets boring or overstays its welcome, even when you add the bonus tracks on the digital and CD versions of the album. It's captivating from start to finish. Its explosive brand of guitar-driven grunge pop is something that very few bands manage to captivate quite as well. Harry Styles' self-titled album. I know, right? My cynical teenage girl-hating self not only enjoyed an album by someone from One Direction, but actually consider it to be one of the best albums of the year. I think Harry Styles surprised pretty much everyone with this album. While all the other members went off to make super generic pop music, Harry Styles went away and brought us an album that is basically a love letter to 70s rock, mixing elements of artists such as Fleetwood Mac, the Beatles, David Bowie, The Police, and even some Britpop musicians such as Blur. The album is a brash, exciting, and at times beautiful album. Harry Styles presents himself as a full-blown rock star on the album, and he is incredibly convincing. His vocals are incredible in every track. He handles the more epic rock stuff and also the more somber, folky stuff perfectly. It really feels like an album that has been slaved over, and although some people may say the album is a bit overproduced, I think the lavish, flashy production really propels the songs and makes them more interesting and compelling than otherwise. There are songs that are more straightforward and simple, songs like the acoustic ballad Sweet Creature and From the Dining Room Table, label, the latter of which being an almost lo-fi singer-songwriter-esque song. And there's also the song Ever Since New York, which takes things in a very Oasis-inspired direction. Similar to every song on the album, it has these incredibly catchy and memorable melodies, and the hook on that thing is so simple yet effective. Harry's voice on this song is so emotive, it sounds incredible. As for my favourite song on the album, I hate to be super generic here, but it's by far Sign of the Times. Anyone curious as to what my favourite pop song of the year is, it's this one by a mile. It's just an incredible song. Harry Styles wears his Bowie influence on his sleeve with this track that reminds me of Bowie's Hunky Dory album. It's an anthemic, powerful song which blew away all its competition on the radio. It came out at a time when it was needed, and its power hit me and most who heard it incredibly hard. And still to this day, it's a track that kicks me straight in the teeth. It's just... words don't describe how fantastic this song is. The album as a whole never quite reaches the height of this song, but that doesn't mean it isn't good. It's still a fantastic record, a sign of what could be a very interesting and exciting solo career for Harry Styles, and I for one cannot wait. The Spark by Enter Shikari. Speaking of albums that surprised me, Enter Shikari made an album that I actually liked. I've never been a fan of these guys. Their style of post-hardcore / electronica never appealed to me. I keep trying to get into them, but I've just never been able to do it. However, the Rock Critic did a review of their newest album, The Spark, and compared it to Block Party, which intrigued me. So I listened to the sites and fell in love with the track. I gave the album a listen and have pretty much been listening to it on loop ever since. With Shikari's new album, they strip away all the hardcore influences and take things into a more electronic and post-punk territory. The album has a very spacey feel to it, and the heavy use of synthesizers at times give me slight Angels and Airwaves space rock vibes. Songs like The Sights and Live Outside are catchy, incredibly melodic tracks that sound huge and have the feeling of soaring through space at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Never has their arena status felt more ingrained into their music. There are tracks like Rabble Rouser that feel a lot more like something from their earlier work. Although not quite as heavy, it's very fast-paced, aggressive, and full of rapping. It has an almost grime / house feel to it. It feels like something that could play in a nightclub, but mixed in with the album's anxious guitar lines. Lyrically, the album focuses on the feelings of anxiety that lead singer Rue felt following the world events of the past couple years, and that anxiety plants itself perfectly into the music. The album feels way more sophisticated and interesting than the band's previous work. Many of the tracks on the album tackle important modern political and social issues, especially the Brexit-inspired Take My Country Back, which is one of the highlights of the album. I never expected that Enter Shikari would make an album that I liked, let alone loved, but it somehow happened. Well done, guys. Please do the same thing next time. OK by Otherkin. Yet another debut album from an indie rock band. Otherkin are definitely more on the post-punk revival side of indie rock, taking obvious influence from bands like The Strokes and The Vines. Their music is very raw, distorted and blistering, full of stompy guitar riffs that are simple and brash. The album shows the band at their most snarky and nihilistic. Their choruses are huge sing-along anthems and their music is intense and begs for the listener to just lose themselves. Songs like I and Yeah I Know are these marching tracks that instantly grip you in. They're two of the most anthemic and standout tracks on the album. The album is a relentless blast of excitement. It never slows down and keeps the pace up all throughout, something that easily could have gotten really stale. But luckily every track on the album is a pure banger. Tracks like Razorhead shows the band incredible knack for catchy riffs, anarchic energy and also beautifully destructive guitar tones. The vocals are very snotty and growly. I get very strong stereophonic vibes from vocalist Luke's voice. Every track on the album is exciting, euphoric and powerful. It all leads up to the closing track So So, which is an absolute powerhouse of a song that gives me goosebumps whenever I hear it. Its 5.5 minute length flies past as the song builds up to a huge explosive crescendo. If you like your indie rock chaotic and punk inspired, then this album is definitely for you. It's one that I've been having a blast with over the last few months. Damn by Kendrick Lamar. I hate modern hip-hop. I think it's super generic and boring. There are almost no rappers from the 2010s who I really like, but Kendrick Lamar is one one of the very few. Good Kid, Mad City and To Pimp a Butterfly quickly became two of my favourite hip-hop albums of all time after I discovered them, so I was really excited for Damn's release, especially after the release of Humble and Kendrick's explosion to become one of the biggest musicians in the world. The first time I heard the album I was slightly disappointed just because the album was nowhere near as good as his previous albums. However, over time I've definitely warmed up to it massively. The album still is nowhere near as good as the previous two records, and to be completely fair to Kendrick, following up To Pimp a Butterfly, an album that has become an instant genre classic, was a very huge feat to take on. But instead of trying super hard to make something similar to it or something even more ambitious, he just decided to make a straightforward hip-hop album. Damn, similar to Good Kid, Mad City, blends classic West Coast hip-hop with more modern hip-hop. There are aggressive songs like Humble, but the album is surprisingly quite chilled out at times. The beats focus much more on rhythm than anger. Its soulful vibes mix perfectly in with Kendrick's genius rhymes and fantastic knack for storytelling. The album feels very episodic and confident. Kendrick has an insane flow on the album, and it's home to some of his best songwriting performances to date. The songs are memorable and catchy enough to have crossover success, but yet still he never holds back. His message is just as strong as it's ever been, and he literally screams it at you at times. Songs like DNA and Humble are explosive tracks with incredibly fast rapping and perfectly produced beats. To be completely honest, hip-hop is not something I normally review, so I'm kind of out of my area of expertise here, which makes talking about the album kind of difficult. Regardless, this is an incredible album, one that easily deserves its spot on the list. Melodrama by Lorde. So this album's gonna win the Album of the Year Grammy, right? I mean, considering it's one of the biggest albums of the year and seems to be at the top of every best albums of the year list I've seen, I would be very shocked if someone else got it. Like everyone else in the world, I quite liked Lorde's debut album. However, with her much anticipated follow-up, she improved on everything that made the first album so good. It's an incredibly smart pop record that is lyrically and musically brilliant. The album is a concept album that explores feelings of solitude with the narrative of everything being set at a house party. The album is an incredibly beautiful and emotional record about being alone. Lorde is very open and honest about herself and describes all the feelings that she's feeling perfectly. There are moments of self-deprecation on the album where she literally sings about her flaws, especially on the incredible Writer in the Dark, a bitter love song about trying to move forward but being unable to get rid of those feelings. It's a song that hit me incredibly hard when I heard it, and is still by far my favourite track on the album. Although the tracks aren't quite as minimal as their debut album, they still manage to be much more intimate and personal. The album is one that anyone who has ever had unrequited feelings for someone or has still been in love with someone after breaking up with them definitely needs to listen to. Lorde's writing is just spot on, not to mention her vocals and melodies are fantastic and the production work is incredible. Yeah, there's a good reason why this album has gotten the attention it has. It's easily the best pop record to come out this year, one that I highly recommend to anyone who hasn't checked it out yet. Outrageous Now by Death From Above. I am a huge fan of this band. I got into them shortly before their big revival album The Physical World came out back in 2014 and have been in love ever since. They were an incredibly unique punk band that blended elements of disco and funk into their primarily drum and bass guitar setup. The duo now returns with their third album and first album without the 1979 bit on the end of their name. Outrageous Now is an album that people seem really split on. People either consider it to be one of the best albums the band have done to date, or they consider it to be completely awful. I of course consider it the former of the two. I adore this album. I honestly think this is up there with their first album. On this album, Death From Above strip away the punk style of their previous two records and goes in a more hard rock / 70s heavy metal style. Things are still as simple as ever. Instrumentation mostly consists of a heavily distorted bass guitar, drums, vocals and some slight synth work. However, with the album it seems like the band have a stronger awareness of songwriting. The songs here are way more melodic and catchy than ever before. In many ways, this is the band in a completely different light that we've ever seen them. Although songs like the fantastic closing track Holy Book still have a lot of that mosh pit sensibility to them. But for the most part it seems like they're intentionally trying to become a different band entirely, and it makes the album more interesting and engaging than their sophomore release, which although still really good was mostly just them retreading all the steps they made on their debut. It's obvious with this album the band have taken a lot of influence from bands like Black Sabbath and Guns N' Roses, poses. This swagger and aggression that both bands had are seen all over the place on this album. Not to mention Sebastian's vocals are just as powerful as those acts also. In fact, it's really surprising to see how far he stretches his vocals on this album. At times he does stretch it a little bit too far, but luckily these moments are very few and far between. If you want a really good album from a bass and drum hard rock duo, because we didn't get that from Royal Blood this year, then I highly recommend this new DFA album. It honestly pained me to put it as low as I did on the list. Broken Machine by Nothing But Thieves. This album's placement on this list has been all over the place. 1 second it's number 2, then it's album of the year, and now I'm putting it here. I can't be bothered to change it again, it lives here now. With their sophomore album, Nothing But Thieves take the formula of their first album and flips it up on its head. Although tracks like Amsterdam and I'm Not Made by Design are the same huge anthemic arena tracks that their first album was full of, with this album they experiment and take things into new and exciting direction. The album sees the band take inspiration from Britpop, 70s hard rock, and mix it all in with the Muse/Killers-esque sound that we know and love from the band. The songs have a stronger pop sensibility to them, with catchier, more sing-along choruses. The band continues their exciting use of guitar effects and creates sounds that can at times be otherworldly. The usage of synthesizers and electronic effects contrast the fuzz-heavy guitar lines perfectly, not to mention Connor Mason's incredible vocals that put most vocalists to shame. On this album he stretches his range stronger than ever before and absolutely nails it. His vocals on the track Particles are particularly moving. I already gushed over that song in my review of the album, but just a reminder, this song is incredible. It's honestly my favourite song to come out in 2017. It hit me in the gut as soon as I heard it, and when I got to see the band live recently, the song honestly brought me to tears. And quickly, while we're talking about that, definitely go check them out live. The gig I went to on their UK tour for this album is to date the best live performance I've ever seen. Broken Machines shows Connor singing more personally and honestly than ever before, tackling the feelings of addiction, mental health, and the strains that all these as well as touring has on a relationship. He also sings about social and political issues on tracks like Live Like Animals, and he sings about a loss of faith on the very Queens of the Stone Age-esque opener I Was Just a Kid. If you want a really exciting anthemic arena rock album, then I highly recommend checking this thing out. I've listened to this album maybe about 30 times at least, and I'm still enjoying it now. Dumb Blood by Vant. So for a long time I was saying that this was my album of the year. In fact, before the album even came out I said the album was going to be my album of the year. The other two albums on this list are really that good that they just took the place of this one completely. I've not really talked about Vant that much on this channel, but basically, I absolutely love these guys. I discovered them shortly after the release of their very first single back in 2015. I've since followed them closely, buying loads of merch, records, and seeing them live 4 times. In fact, I even saw them twice before they had even released a single album. And when they announced their indefinite hiatus a few months ago, I was so upset. But at least they released this one album, one that I adore. Vant are an indie rock/punk rock band who are a perfect blend of newer bands like Arctic Monkeys, as well as classic punk bands like The Clash and The Jam. What attracted me to the band originally was their strong political stance and their lyrics. Very few punk bands nowadays really have that, so it was really cool to see done this way. Although their political messages could easily have been overbearing, they have a strong sense of humour in their lyrics that stop it from being that. This is seen in songs like Fly By Alien, a Britpop inspired song about an alien who wants to destroy the planet but sees that we've already been doing it ourselves. The album tackles important subjects like climate change, sexual assault, Syrian refugees, and gun control, all with these strong punchy hooks. The album feels at times like a political run, with singer Matty shouting at the top of his lungs. As well as this, the album is full of incredibly memorable riffs, impressive drum fills, and choruses that beg to be belted at the top of your voice. Although The Regrets perfectly encapsulated social feelings in youth, Vant perfectly capture our feelings politically. Dumb Blood serves in many ways as a bold, anarchic statement on how we feel about the world. world. While listening to the album, I felt like I finally had a voice there to speak the things I believe in. Songs like my absolute favourite from the band, Peace and Love, beg for change and take a stand against all that is wrong in the world, and the lyrics fit perfectly with the frantic smashing drum lines and huge guitar riffs. But I should say this album is no masterpiece or anything. There are big problems with it, and there are times where I can fully understand why the critical reception was quite average, especially when listening to the deluxe edition, which I strongly recommend against. It adds 3 interludes, 2 really bad new songs and some B-sides, some of which are great and some of which are just okay. But regardless, this is an album that I personally love and think has some incredibly important and powerful messages. I really hope these guys come back sometime soon because they're an incredible live band as well. Plus I really want album number 2. Although having said that, the EP they released of the albums recorded from the scrapped follow-up album wasn't that great. So maybe it's best they stay dead. I don't know. All I know is that Dumb Blood is one of my favourite albums from this year and I love it to bits. Science Fiction by Brand New. Okay, let's get this bit out of the way before I get loads of hate comments, which I probably still will. The things that Jesse Lacey was accused of and has admitted to sucked. I'm not condoning what he did or saying that he was right for doing so. And like a lot of people for a while, I refused to listen to the band. But eventually I decided that I needed to separate the art from the artist. Sadly, a lot of artists are terrible people and have done despicable things. But that doesn't mean the art they create is completely without merit. As well as this, there are 3 other members to Brand New, so what's the point in writing off the band completely because one of the members did something terrible? Not to mention that even if I was to write off the band completely, there's no denying the impact this album had on me. The album is fantastic and I'm not going to forget that. If you can't look past what Jesse did and just enjoy the music for what it is, then that's completely fair and doesn't make you a bad person. Just like it doesn't make me a bad person for still enjoying the music regardless. Now that's out of the way, let's get into science fiction. With this album, Brand New seemed to step away from their emo sound almost completely and instead lean more towards a complex, intricate indie rock style. Taking strong influence from bands like Modest Mouse, this album shows the band in a whole new light and gives us a real career highlight. After some listeners have actually been left thinking that this album is actually their best. And The Devil and God is one of my all-time favourite albums, so that's something I don't say lightly. The album is a hypnotic, cinematic trip that is the perfect note to end the band's almost 20-year career. Every single track is a pure marvel, whether it's the explosiveness of tracks like Out of Manner or In the Water, or the soft, mellow sound of Could Never Be Heaven. Musically, the album is incredibly intriguing. There's constantly something interesting going on, whether it's in the instrumentation or in the lyrics. The band takes some of the arena-style anthems of some of their earliest songs and mixed them in with more exciting and folk-esque textures, bringing mandolins, banjos, horns, and harmonicas into the sound. The album has a real anxious feel to it, which is perfectly mirrored in the album's at times self-deprecating lyrical content. Everything on the album feels perfectly placed. There's never a moment where I feel like they decided on something just because it sounded cool. Everything sounds important. Every single sound, every lyric, every vocal melody all has strong purpose on the album. Hence why so many people, including myself, compared this album to one of Radiohead's better albums. Science Fiction is an interesting, complex, and exciting work of art. I think it's the best rock album released this year. The only reason it's not #1 on this list is because there's one that I found myself listening to more. There's one album that left a bigger impact on me personally and influenced more of the music that I got into this year than any other. But before we get to our #1 spot, let's take a look at a few honourable mentions, just a few albums that almost made the list but for one reason or another just didn't. Lot of Sea Lice by Courtney Barnett and Kurt Vile. I was really looking forward to this album because I'm a huge fan of Courtney Barnett's debut album. In fact, it was even on my favourite album list back in 2015. And this album was pretty good, but not amazing or anything. It's a pretty and chilled piece of indie rock. The album sees Courtney Barnett collaborating with Kurt Vile, and it's a collaboration that works really well. I just wasn't blown away by the album or anything. Although the track Peeping Tom is definitely one of my favourite tracks released this this year. The Peace and the Panic by Neck Deep. This album really surprised me. I've honestly never been a fan of Neck Deep, it just seemed like average pop punk to me. But with this new album I thought they did a really good job. It's full of great guitar riffs, really catchy melodies and huge hooks. The album is a mature and dark album about the end of times. It's one that I really enjoyed, but it's still not the greatest thing I've ever heard or anything. 24/7 Rockstar Shit by The Cribs. Following some of the most polished material of the band's career, The Cribs went back to the grungy lo-fi sound of their first two albums on this thing. Steve Albini's production on the album took things back to basic for the band and gave us an album full of really great songs that reminded me what made the band so unique to begin with. And finally, Devolver by Jamie Lenman. Ex-Reuben frontman Jamie Lenman's second solo album is by far his most exciting and gripping, completely leaving behind the grindcore and folk sound of his debut double album and going back to the more straightforward post-hardcore sound. Devolver is an album that manages to be ambitious and fun without ever getting too self-indulgent, although it just isn't as good as those three Reuben albums. If you've never listened to Reuben, I couldn't recommend them enough. They're an incredible blend of post-hardcore and alternative metal that don't get the recognition that they really deserve. And my number one favourite album of 2017 is Eternity in Your Arms by Creeper. How could it be anything other than Creeper? This album is one that has really stuck with me ever since I first heard it. I've listened to it more than any other album this year and have just become absolutely obsessed with the band. The horror punk band blends elements of pop punk, hardcore punk and theatrical hard rock together to create what at times sounds like AFI covering a Meatloaf song. The band's debut is an incredibly ambitious, adrenaline-filled record that is both colourful and dark as night. It's a concept album that centres around a detective known as James Syfe who goes missing while investigating the supernatural legends in the band's home city of Southampton. The band then transport you into a supernatural gothic world full of fantasy and romance. The album brings back all the legends they created with their previous EPs and expands upon them. This includes the ghostly mythical gang known as the Callous Hearts, whose cynical look on young love fuels a large portion of the album. The album is incredibly majestic and theatrical. It at times feels like a piece of emo musical theatre, but the band's confidence and energy keeps it from feeling corny or cheesy. The imagination of the narrative keeps the album from being just another free-chord punk album. Although it may seem at times loose, when you start to pay attention to the lyrics and everything going on, it all starts to make sense. Its dramatic gothic creativity makes it a huge cut above many of the other bands doing similar things. This is all blended together with these incredibly catchy choruses, huge pounding guitar lines and soft synths and piano lines that, although at times may be very quiet in the mix, really help flesh out the tracks and make them feel huge. The album is a very anthemic and explosive record that deserves to be played at full volume. Although some may see this album as just another average pop punk album, to me it's way more than that. It's an album that celebrates the dark so gleefully and energetically, and it does it centered around this interesting and creative narrative. There are some lesser moments on the album though. I Choose to Live is quite cheesy and definitely one of the worst songs the band have ever done. But when the album is at its best, it is just incredible. It's an exciting, emotional and euphoric experience. It cements Creeper as one of the most interesting upcoming bands in the scene. I could talk for ages about how much I love this album, but this video is long enough already. So does your list of favourite albums completely differ to mine? Let me know in the comment section what your personal favourite list is. I'm hoping to do a worst albums of the year list video sometime soon, and of course my yearly worst songs of the year video will be out hopefully early to mid-January. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.